The Christmas season is upon us, but most importantly, so are the fantasy playoffs. So, as a special Christmas treat, I'm going to bring you my full week 16 rankings, running them all down so you can make sure you have the best chances in your fantasy semifinals. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today, I'm taking you through my full Week 16 rankings for your fantasy semifinals. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below or hit me up over at Twitter at the Fantasy First Down or on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Now, you can also check out my updated rankings that I'll be consistently updating over the course of the weekend over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. But let's get into what we're starting with here. And we're starting off with the quarterbacks. And the first few are pretty obvious starts, but we've got some surprise names in there. Dak Prescott gets a tough matchup against the Chargers. We know, for example, that they have conceded the second fewest points to quarterbacks this season, but it's Dak. He is going to be aggressive. I still expect points there. I'm still starting him. Likewise, Brock Purdy is a surprise name. The Colts aren't typically the best matchup, but I think in this situation here, we could see Purdy go well. Drake May's been falling a little bit to me of late because he has been struggling to really explode in games. He's mostly been average consistently, and you're going to get more upside with other guys. Having said that, May has a better floor with pretty much anyone on this list. Likewise, Lamar Jackson hasn't been the greatest of late, but the Patriots are a better passing matchup than running matchup, and I do still think Lamar is a solid start. You are starting all of your starts. Now, my favorite streamer type players, well, Jacoby Brissett has been very solid of late. He's got 9 straight top 12 finishes. He gets the Falcons, which are an upper half matchup. I'm certainly starting him. Justin Herbert has been pretty much unusable the last few weeks, but he gets the best quarterback matchup in football in the Cowboys, even though he is away. I'm definitely still starting Herbert if he's available to me. And Jared Goff is another one who gets a very good matchup against the Steelers. That's a top 10 matchup. He's been very solid in those sorts of situations. I do love Goff this week. CJ Stroud has been improving as well. He gets the Raiders, which are a top half matchup. I think he's a solid option, as is Bo Nix, who gets another top half matchup in the Jaguars. None of these guys are really getting the best matchups, but they're all solid starting options, and I'm comfortable with pretty much any of those top 12. Jordan Love's a little bit riskier because they could just run the ball, but typically against the Bears, you want to go through the air. They have conceded the 9th most points to quarterbacks so far this season, so I do think Love is a viable option. Lawrence appears to be risky on paper because the Broncos are a bottom 5 matchup, but they have conceded the 11th most points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. I do feel like Lawrence could still be solid. And the last guy I feel particularly comfortable with is JJ McCarthy. He gets one of the better matchups in football against the Giants. It's been good the last couple of weeks. I do think he could have another solid game this week. Matthew Stafford is one that's very scary. Most of you have just been starting him every week, but Devontae Adams is out, and he does get a tough matchup against the Seahawks. They have conceded the 26th most points to quarterbacks this season. That's kind of scary, as is Jackson Dart, who has been a good start most weeks, especially for his rushing floor, but he gets the Vikings, who are the 3rd toughest matchup for quarterbacks in football. I'm not risking that. Running back wise, and well, you're starting your start. You're starting Bijan, you're starting McCaffrey, you're starting Achane. Cook's an obvious one, despite the fact he gets the Browns. He has been scoring so many touchdowns. I'm still starting him. And Gibbs is also a solid option, despite not getting the best matchup against the Steelers. Gets a little bit tougher with Jonathan Taylor. I do think the volume will get him through. It is a top half matchup against the 49ers. And I feel like if he's going to get another 25 carries, he's going to be someone you want in your lineup. Saquon Barkley has been good the last couple of weeks. He must go in, as must Travis Etienne. With no Bashal Tutin, Etienne gets a very heavy load. Josh Jacobs is where the risk really starts. He takes on the Bears, who are better attack through the air, as I said. Having said that, he's got so much touchdown upside and volume upside that for me, I'm still kind of having to start him. Same thing with Bucky Irving. He's scary because he's losing a lot of goal line work to Sean Tucker. But for me, you've got to start Irving against the Panthers. They have conceded the 9th most points to running backs. Javonte Williams against the Chargers. This one could go either way. There's a lot of upside there, and you do want to run on the Chargers typically rather than throwing the ball. But Williams is a little bit risky, but in most leagues, you're definitely going to be starting him. Same thing with Chase Brown. Not the best matchup against the Dolphins, but he does seem to be getting enough volume to get him through. Travion Henderson is a scary one because he's really splitting stats with Ramondre Stevenson, but he's the one getting all the fantasy value. So for that reason, against the Ravens, which is a solid running back matchup, I would start him. Likewise with Woody Marks, if he's healthy, he's going to be good, but there is some risk here, not because he's going to lose snaps to someone else, but we just don't know how many snaps he's going to get due to his health. So in this situation, he gets a good matchup against the Raiders. They're the seventh best matchup in football for a running back, but can you trust Marks? Well, listen carefully to the injury reports. He's not training yet, but if he is later on the weekend, I'm going to be feeling pretty good about him. Quinshon Judkins has been very up and down, but we know that the Bills concede a lot of points to running backs. Judkins is someone that I feel like you kind of need to start. Derrick Henry has been losing a lot of snaps to, a number of people. Rasheen Ali in the passing game. Also Mitchell in the run game. For that reason, he's a very risky start against the Patriots, who have conceded the fourth fewest points to running backs this season. He is off my list of guys that I'm confident to start, and he becomes a risky option. Having said that, there'll still be a solid amount of volume there unless they fall behind really, really early. Breece Hall is another one who's a little bit scary. He gets the Saints, which is a solid matchup, but it's hard to know exactly what they're doing at the moment. I do feel like there's some upside, especially in PPR. And in PPR, I'd have him ahead of Henry, maybe even Judkins. This is half PPR, though, which drops him down a little bit for me. RJ Harvey is getting plenty of volume, but he's very scary against the Jaguars. They are the second toughest matchup for running backs. He is not someone I can feel confidently good about, but you probably have to start him anyway because there's a lot of guys with those awkward matchups this week. Anyone from Henry below, realistically, you've got a solid wide receiver. I'd nearly lean towards them, especially in PPR. DeAndre Swift and Kyren Williams are both getting the better part of a committee. Swift gets the Packers, which is not the greatest matchup, but they have been running the ball so much, the Bears, and Swift has been getting the more valuable touches, so he's an okay start for me. Kyren Williams is nearly 50-50 with Blake Corum, but I feel like that might shift against the Seahawks, who are difficult to move the ball on, but they're difficult to pass on as well. And I feel like when we have no Devontae Adams, you're probably going to see a lot more Williams. You're going to see a lot more heavy tight end personnel. And for that reason, we might see a little bit more action for the run game. And Williams would be used more than Corum if the game is close. Going a little bit deeper, Tyrone Tracy was sold last week. He's going to be hard to trust this week. He gets the Vikings. You can run on the Vikings relative to passing, but can you feel good about Tracy? Well, no. We don't know if he's getting the goal line work. Devin Singletary's been getting it a lot of the time, but we did see Tracy look very good last week, so that makes him an upside start for me. Aaron Jones also has upside. Whether you're going to use him or Jordan Mason is a question. Mason's been getting enough goal line work to be scary with Jones, but Jones is still the valuable guy in this offense. The Giants are a fantastic top three matchup for running backs, but it's hard to feel good about Jones. Michael Carter gets a tougher matchup against the Falcons, but it seems like he's going to be the clear lead back ahead of Amari Demercado. Having said that, with the Cardinals, it's always unclear exactly what they're going to do if there's an injury. Having had a weakened Bam Carter on IR, it's possible Demercado gets more touches, but I think they'll give Carter the first chance. He did look good deputizing last week. Rico Dowdle is a tricky one. He does seem to be getting the early down work with Chuba Hubbard taking the receiving work. Both are solid options against the Buccaneers, who have been a top 10 running back matchup. I would prefer to start Dowdle given that volume, but Hubbard's a solid option in PPR. Hard to trust Ashton Jeanty because he gets the Texans. Can run the Texans better than you can pass on them, but this feels like the kind of game where the Raiders will play a total of 40 snaps. Jeanty gets 10 touches, mostly on the ground, ends up with, 6 PPR points or something like that. There is upside here, but I don't like it. Amari and Hampton is in a split with Kamani Vidal. It's hard to know what to trust at the moment. I do feel like they're going to pass the ball a whole lot more, and Hampton is not the guy in that situation. That makes him very scary. He and Jeanty are guys that I'm avoiding if I can, but I'd still start them over these lower guys like your Pollards, who really are going to have a lot of down weeks with their lack of volume. Pollard takes on the Chiefs, which is a tough matchup, but not as tough a matchup as Walker gets against the Rams. That is the toughest running back matchup in football. That's why I've got he and Zach Charbonnet so low. I don't trust either of them. Speaking of tough matchups, the Lions also get a bottom three matchup, which means Warren and Gainwell are hard to trust. We don't even know who's going to get the volume. They both get that tough matchup. Of the low-end guys that you need in the deeper league, Blake Corum should get nearly 50% snaps, but there is also that risk that they dial that back, as I said earlier, because it's a tougher matchup. But Corum is someone with some upside. Ramondre Stevenson also splitting and getting a solid amount of the split. He gets the Ravens. That should be a solid matchup as well. Those are both guys you can feel okay about. Chris Rodriguez should be the starter against the Eagles, and it is a solid top 12 matchup. But with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt looking pretty good last week, do we suddenly see that turning back into a split? That's the risk there, and that's why I'm not willing to risk it with him. Coleman Angai and Tyler Algier, they're both mainly early down guys who are kind of transitioning in and just doing basically half the early down work. They both have a little bit of goal line upside, which is the use here, but very hard to trust either of them. Algier has the better matchup. Manangai will get more volume. Don't love either of those as options. David Montgomery, very hard to trust as well. He's only getting about 20% of the snaps, and outside the goal line work, none of them are very valuable. He gets a tough matchup against the Steelers. Know a lot of people talking about the Saints, guys. I know that the Jets is a good matchup, but they're going to do a 50-50 split, and I don't think the run game will be particularly effective, even though the Jets defense has typically been weak against the run. I don't love Estime or Hull. Estime gets a little bit more receiving work, which adds to his points upside, but realistically, I'm avoiding both. Wide receivers, and well, you're starting your studs, so there's nothing to stay there. We know that if you've got a Nakuas and Brown, Chase, Smith and Jigba, you're definitely starting them. Nico Collins gets a great matchup and he's looked good this season. You're starting him. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, a lot scarier, taking on the Chargers. Toughest matchup for wide receivers in football, but I still feel like with Dak Prescott, he's still going to pass the ball. You're still going to see enough upside with Lamb or Pickens. They're the kind of guys that can break through that sort of tough matchup. Michael Wilson gets a solid matchup against the Falcons. They are the 8th best matchup for wide receivers. Assuming that Marvin Harrison's out, and I have him out at this stage, that may change. That makes Wilson an excellent option. He's getting a lot of volume. Jamison Williams also been very busy lately and gets another good matchup against the Steelers. When he gets a good matchup, he often goes off, but his floor is lower than most in this range. Same thing with AJ Brown, who many were calling a massive bust early in the season. That looks a little bit silly now because he has been good the last few weeks. The Commanders are a good matchup for a wide receiver, a top 10 matchup. He's a solid option. Drake London is very scary, but I feel like against the Cards, which are a middle-of-the-road matchup, he should be one of the main guys in this offense, and I will happily start him if he is healthy. Just look out for reports on exactly how healthy he is. Guys like Chris Olave, a little bit scarier because they're going to get a lot of volume, and the Jets aren't exactly the best matchup for wide receivers, but there is touchdown upside here. Likewise with DK Metcalf, look, there's plenty of touchdown upside against the Lions. You can definitely pass on the Lions. They are the second best matchup for wide receivers, but Metcalf could also have a very quiet game. We've seen that happen plenty of times with him. He comes with plenty of risks. Mike Evans was good in his first game back. Not the best matchup against the Panthers, but I'm still starting him. Juwan Jennings does get a good matchup against the Colts. That's top 5. He is the guy I want to start. Ricky Pearsall, also a solid option. If he is healthy, which is a big question mark. Cortland Sutton is a solid option as well. Gets a good top half matchup. He has taken over that number 1 role for the Broncos. Ted McMillan, Jalen Waddle make me very, very nervous. They're not the greatest matchups. You can kind of attack those teams in other ways. Tampa can be attacked on the ground and through tight ends. And we know that the same is true of the Bengals. For that reason, both of those wide receivers are a little bit scary, especially McMillan, who's not fully healthy. Justin Jefferson's been awful ever since JJ McCarthy came back, but this is a fantastic top 3 matchup. The upside's still there. You're going to look really silly if you drafted him in the first round. You're somehow in the playoffs, or maybe you've got him in Dynasty, and then you sit him and he absolutely blows up. He always has that upside. I would rather start him than someone with less upside. Devontae Smith has been used a little bit less because they're using a lot more multi-tight end sets or just running the ball, and for that reason, Smith lacks that same upside, but it is a good matchup against Washington. Zay Flowers scares me because there's a lot of touchdown upside, but in PPR leagues, he is a solid option, especially against the patch where you're going to have to pass the ball. Jacoby Myers has been good of late. I like him for his upside. Terry McLaurin, not the greatest matchup, but I feel like you still need to start him. Same thing with Wan'Dale Robinson. Tough matchup. With Robinson, you're looking for volume. With McLaurin, you're looking for those big plays. Either way, in these matchups, they're still solid wide receiver 3 or low-end wide receiver 2 options. Christian Watson, assuming he is healthy, I'm starting against the Bears because that's a fantastic matchup. If he's not starting, I think Romeo Dobbs becomes interesting. Plus, I do like Jaden Reed. I feel like the volume's going to be there for him. He was solid in his first game back. I can see that rising. Lad McConkey has been pretty mediocre, but I feel pretty good about starting pretty much any of the Chargers wide receivers if you're looking for upside. Keenan Allen could have a solid game if Quinton Johnston's out. And if Johnston's out, Trey Harris becomes a low-end option that I've got just into the 40s as well. He's someone you can start if you're a little bit more desperate. Brian Thomas gets what looks like a tough matchup against the Broncos on paper, but they have been worse against wide receivers of late. I think Thomas could be solid, and even Parker Washington is a desperation option in deeper leagues. I'm starting him in a 14-team league, for example. Adonai Mitchell was very good last week. The Saints is an okay matchup. I feel okay about starting him. Same thing with Luther Burden, not the greatest matchup, but he does seem like he's getting enough volume to make him worthwhile starting. I'm comfortable with him. Slightly less comfortable with the likes of DJ Moore if Burden is playing. Also hard to know what to do with Rome Odunze. I don't expect him to play, but if he is, that's going to throw all of these guys up in the air and drop them down my rankings. Debo Samuel doesn't get the greatest matchup, and he has been struggling a bit with Terry McLaurin coming back. Will be interesting to see if he can bounce back. He is a solid option. The guys like Godwin and Egbuka, with Evans coming back, this really hurts them. Godwin also hurts Egbuka, and Jalen McMillan coming back will hurt his snaps as well. All of these Bucks guys are very hard to trust. Not a great matchup, but they're okay desperation options. Jordan Addison has more upside than anyone in this range. He gets a great matchup against the Giants, but a very, very low floor. Stephon Diggs has a low floor. I can see him exploding in any given week, but he's only playing 50% odd snaps. That's very scary. The matchup against the Ravens is solid, but can you trust Diggs? Absolutely not. Hollins and Booty are solid low-end options. They're just inside my top 50. Troy Franklin's an interesting one. It's hard to tell what's going to happen, especially if Pat Bryant comes back and plays. If Bryant's out, then Franklin goes here. But if Bryant plays, all of a sudden Franklin becomes interesting and a little bit scarier. I think that Bryant probably takes over that role, but I wouldn't start any of these guys. Bryant being out, however, means that Franklin becomes a very low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 option. I'm not touching guys like Pittman and Pierce with Phillip Rivers in. I don't trust him at all. I'm not dropping them yet, but I'm definitely not trusting them in this matchup. Tight end wise, and I mean, you're obviously starting a Trey McBride, George Kittle, you've got to start as well. Despite the fact that in this situation, it's only an okay matchup. I do think that Kittle could have a good game. Kyle Pitts gets that great matchup against the Cards. They're a good tight end matchup. And if Drake London's out, he's an excellent option. If Drake London is in, I still think we could see Pitts be okay. Brock Bowers gets that very tough matchup against the Texans. I don't trust him in that, but you also can't sit him because he has massive upside. Colby Parkinson's an interesting one. With Devontae Adams out last week, he essentially became the wide receiver 2. They played a lot of 3 tight end sets, a record amount, according to PFF. And so for that reason, in a very good matchup against the Seahawks, this is the 6th best matchup for tight ends in the league. I think that Parkinson is someone that you really should be going out and getting and starting. There's no one else here I feel particularly good about, but I think that Parkinson will get the volume and the snaps to make this work. Dallas Goedert also gets a solid matchup against the Commanders. They're a top 4 tight end matchup, and he has been getting a lot of touchdowns. He has upside, but he has a much lower floor than most guys in this range. Howard Fannin, on the other hand, gets the toughest matchup for tight ends, but he's nearly not playing like a tight end. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with whether David Njoku's back. Assuming he's not, I still think that Fannon's a solid option. If Njoku is back, it nearly helps Fannin a little bit because I feel like he can be used more as a wide receiver. Travis Kelce gets an okay matchup against the Titans. You're really hoping he scores, but you also think that maybe with Gardner Minshew there, you might see some more checkdowns. Also, Rashee Rice's injury certainly should help Kelce as well, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Darren Waller gets an excellent matchup against the Bengals. We've seen the Bengals consistently be the best matchup for tight ends until last week when Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely totally busted. That makes me a bit nervous about Waller, but his snaps did seem to bounce back last week, and I do think he's a very solid upside option. Dalton Schultz, a little bit hard to trust. Very tough matchup against the Raiders, but he has been solid of late. I do think he's got upside. Tyler Warren, on the other hand, very little upside with Phillip Rivers, but you do think like he might get a step forward with another week of practice with Rivers. Warren is hard to trust, but I still think he's going to get some volume being one of their best pass catchers. Brendan Strange has been pretty solid, but the Broncos isn't the greatest matchup. They are susceptible to tight ends relative to other positions, but Strange isn't the easiest to trust. He's still better than any of those low-end options, though. Everyone below there, I find it really difficult to trust. The Cowboys don't exactly allow a lot of points to tight ends, so that lowers Gadsden's upside. Loveland is splitting with Komet still, and it's an awkward matchup against the Packers. Dalton Kincaid splitting with Dawson Knox, and against the Browns, that's not a great matchup either. Hunter Henry gets the Ravens, and we know that that is a bad matchup for tight ends. You can see there's just a lot of awkward guys in here, and it's hard to feel good about any of them. Kickers and DSTs, you're starting your obvious guys, but the guys that are available in many leagues, Eddie Piñeiro's back. He's a very solid option for the 49ers. They're going to score a lot of points. We know they're going to have a lot of the ball against the Colts. It feels like a grind fest where there's a lot of tight ends. I like using him. My favorite, though, is Andy Borregales. I haven't got him ranked quite as high as some of the others because he's got a lot of upside. Sorry, he's got a very low floor, but for me, he has a massive amount of upside. The Ravens have been a good kicker matchup for most of the season. Borregales was very good the last couple of weeks before the most recent game. You just need to check the weather in this game. If this is a bad weather game where it's snowing in Baltimore, for example, then Borregales totally drops out for me and you've got to get someone else. Ideally, see if you can hold him because he does get an excellent matchup against the Jets next week. But again, weather will always be an issue there. Another interesting one that a lot of people wouldn't be thinking of is Zane Gonzalez. He's been good this season. The Falcons kicker's been good all season, and the Cardinals are an excellent kicker matchup. I really like him as well. Myers and Bates have traditionally been good kickers, but I don't like these situations for them. Same thing with Tyler Loop. Will Reichert gets a far better matchup, and I feel like he could be more interesting. DSTs and the Texans is very obvious. They're by far the best DST matchup this week. But there are some solid matchups around. The Bills get the Browns. They should be okay, but they do lack the sack upside. For that reason, if your league gives a lot of points for sacks and not as many points for keeping the defense to a low score, then the Bills drop down. Chiefs get a good matchup against the Titans. They're going to have to defend well in that game, so I expect that they will be coming out firing. Eagles have been pretty good of late, and the Commanders have been susceptible to DSTs. But my Saints are one of the ones I've been talking about for weeks in my Streamers and Stashes show. Get an excellent matchup against the Jets. I feel like they could be very productive this week. Don't mind any of those DSTs on that list, though. And that's all we've got for the Week 16 ranking show. Please hit me up in the comments or on my socials if you've got any questions, and head over to ffdfantasyfootball.com and make sure you check out my rankings updates over the course of the weekend. It would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube, and you can also go check out my Streamers and Stashes article over at football.razzball.com. I look forward to seeing you guys in the coming days. Hope you're enjoying your fantasy football finals, and I hope you're into the playoff final next week as we talk through week 17 on the Fantasy First Down.